Good morning, guys. I hope you're all well. Thanks very much for joining me today. What I want to talk about primarily is stillwater dry fly fishing. Now, a lot of the principles will carry over to river fishing, but generally when I'm speaking, I'm talking about stillwater dry fly fishing. So either from the bank or loch style from a drifting boat. So what I'm going to do to start off with is tie a hopper. It's one of my favourite flies for dry fly fishing, and it's fantastic at the back end of the season here in the UK on the stillwaters such as Grapham and Rutland. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm just going to get a hook in the vise. I hope you can see that okay. I'll stick my binoculars on so I can see what I'm doing. And as always, please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to type them out there, and I'll stop every now and again and give it a read. So the hook I've just put in the vise is a Hanak H280 barbless hook. It's at size 12. It's on a medium wire and it's in black nickel. The thread I'm going to be using for this fly is the Simplify Nano Silk. It's at 12/0. I find myself using these Nano Silks more and more of late. They're just dead easy to use, but the only thing is they are a bit slippy on the shank of the hook. So I just like to get a little bit of super glue onto the shank and then use my thread to move it up and down. Doesn't take much, it's just to get that little bit of bed of super glue down. Now I've come about halfway up the shank with my thread. I'm going to remove my rat's tail. Now I'm going to add the rib in at this point, and what I'm using is some Vineyards. It's number 27. As you can see, it's just a silver wire rib, and what I'm going to do is just catch that in where I took my rat's tail off and bring it all the way down. Now generally I would stop at where the barb would be, but on this fly I'm just going to come 2 or 3 turns further back. Now the body of the fly, I'm going to be using seal's fur. Now seal's fur is actually the best thing you can use for dry fly. It's getting good stuff is hard to get a hold of, but I've managed to get some here, and this one's from Cook's Hill, and this is black claret he calls it, but it's pretty black to me. Now it can be a little bit of a bugger to use, so what I'll always do is have some soft wax ready to put onto my thread, and this just helps when dubbing the seal's fur on. So the hopper I'm doing here, it's one of my favourite ones. I suppose it's akin to a bibio hopper, but instead of the red in the middle of the body, I've used I'm going to use some hot orange, but I've got some black seal's fur here. Some of the orange just tried to sneak in there, so I'll just get that out, and then I'm going to dub it on. As I say, it can be a bit unruly, so you've got to really work it in with your fingers. But there's nothing better for flotation. You can't beat a bit of seal's fur proper. You can get synthetic stuff, and if you can't get that, African goats are not a bad substitute. I've used that in the past, and what I'm going to do is just get a few turns on at the back here. I want it fairly thick because I'm going to tease it out, and then as I get towards the middle, I'm just easing back the fibres. Next then, I'm going to bring in some of the hot orange. Again, it's from Cook's Hill, and I've got a little bit out the packet here, and I'm just going to dub that onto the thread. Don't need very much of the orange. It is only a little hot spot in the middle of the fly, so I'm going to slick it back, pull that as far back as I can, and then I'm going to pull the orange as far back as I can. So that's looking not too bad so far, and then I'm going to add a little bit more wax, as I feel like it just needs a bit more grip. And I'll pause there and let's see what folks are saying. Morning Chris, morning Dale. Seals for F&F. Yep, they do some good gear, F&F. I love their frets. Hi Mike. The rivers are all frozen in Michigan. Well, there'll be no dry fly. In fact, it's freezing here. There'll be not much dry fly fishing here, Robert, to be honest. So next, I'm going to dub on the seals fur. Oh, maybe got too much there. I'll just try and ease some of that off without pulling all off the thread. Just get your fingers right in about it. Make sure it's not going to go anywhere. And then you can concentrate on building the second part of your body. Now, I think what a lot of people do with hoppers that causes them to not be as floatable is they don't leave enough room at the front for their hackle. So I don't want to clog this area up with any more. So I'll just remove that little bit of seals fur. And I'm not overly worried. It looks a bit of a mess at the minute, but don't worry, it's all going to come good. So I'm going to now bring my rib up. I want a turn on the black. I want to catch this side of the orange. And I just do this so that I've got a bit of consistency. And when I come over, I'm missing the orange out with my wire. One more turn on the black, and then I'm back onto the shank of my hook. I'm going to bring my thread over just to trap that in for the moment. And then once I'm happy it's secure, get another couple of turns, a few turns in front, keeping tension on my thread. I'm just going to twist away the excess wire and put that to the side because we're going to be using that quite a bit today. Now, what I want to do next before I do anything else is simply come in with my dubbing brush and tease out some of the seals fur. And that's looking pretty buggy. Get underneath it, just give it a little pull out. Now, I had a couple of disasters this week actually, so generally I've gone over to using the pre-tied legs for all my hoppers and any flies with legs. I've got a black one and I've got a natural pheasant one, and could I find either of them for today? So what I've had to do is go back to the old-fashioned pheasant tail, and I've had to pre-tie them before I came on the camera, which took a bit of doing, I don't mind saying. Now, I've seen a few flies on Facebook of late where a lot of the legs seem to be coming out the back of the fly like this, but they're a different kind of pattern from a dry fly. They're more a pulling hopper, and that's I suppose the beauty of the hopper. You know, you can pull it subsurface or you can tie it as a dry fly. Now all my dry flies, if I'm tying legs on them, the legs have got to go below the surface, surely. You know, if an insect's hatching, it's not hatching on its back, it's hatching on its front. So I'm going to angle my legs. I'll do your side first, excuse my fingers, and catch them in. Then I'll grab the other two are tied, and that's the other thing you might have noticed. So I've used two strands of pheasant tail and tied them together. If I was just using single, I'd be tying 3 legs in either side. But that'll do me there, and I'll just catch that. Let it go. Yeah, so the legs are hanging nice and low below the body of the fly. Then I want to remove my waist. I can't seem to find my scissors. There's a set. And I've got that ready for the hackle. Morning Malcolm, how are you? No chance of getting out on the rivers yet. Yeah, that's a real shame. Morning Kieran. So, the hackle. What I'm using is a cock hackle. This is actually, it looks like a black cape, but it's a grizzle cape that's been dyed black, and it's really good quality. I think with dry flies, the quality of your hackling is really important, you know, so buy the best you can afford, and if you can't afford it, steal it from a friend. That's what friends are for, isn't it? So before I do this, I'm going to just add a little bit of wax. And then I'm going to catch the stalk in, just so that it's coming just before the eye. I'll bring that all the way up and park my thread just behind the eye. Next, I need my hackle pliers. And before I start twisting this round, what I like to do is just break the stem. And don't break it off, but you want it coming out at a 90-degree angle from the hook shank so that you get your hackle turns to come around. Now, I've seen lots of people counting their turns to get consistency. I don't do that. I just turn it, and with hoppers I try and pack in as much as I can, and even if that means piling the hackle on top of each other just to get that bushiness, because at the end of the day the seal's fur is going to help you greatly, but it's the hackle that's going to keep your fly in that surface water where you want it. And we're going to, once I've finished tying this, we'll see if there's any questions, and then what I want to move on to is what the trout are actually seeing. So bring that round, and that's looking pretty good. Bring my thread over to meet it, a couple of turns, then I can release my hackle pliers, pull everything back out the way, and then start to build a little black head at the front here. And I'm going to come in with my whip finish tool to finish the fly, and then I'll just remove that, just put that out of the way for now, and then I can just grab the hackle and pull it off. He says it's been a bit reluctant there. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to invert my vise, and I want to remove some of the hackle just below the hook eye without cutting my legs. So excuse my fingers. I don't want to cut the legs I've just tied in. And then I've got the fly, so it'll sit right on the water surface, maybe with the body hanging down a little. Now, the other disaster I had, apart from not being able to find my pre-knotted legs, is I usually have a little bottle of silicone muslin that I would then wash the fly with, but I don't have that. So what I'm going to use, and the label's almost gone from this, is just get a little bit of muslin on my fingers, and I'm going to tease out the hackle. And as I look at this, I think I've probably chosen a hackle just one size too small, but I think the fly will still fish, so I'm fairly happy with that. So there's the hopper. Now, is there any questions on the hopper before we move along to the next part? Will you tie my pheasant legs, Lindsay? Robert, no, I won't. Thanks, Nigel, I'll certainly try. Are you watching the rugby later on? Graham, that's why I'm on at this time of the morning. I want to make sure I catch all the games. I'm really enjoying the Six Nations. It's been a fantastic tournament this year. Morning, Craig. Nigel, I don't want to encourage you to go seal bashing just to get some seals for that. Wouldn't go down too well nowadays. Right, guys, what I'm going to do next, hopefully, he says, is we're going to have a look at the feeding window of a trout. So let me have a play with the buttons. Now, the chat for me is going to drop off slightly, so I'll not be able to see it while I'm doing this part. So bear with me, and we're going to have a look at the feeding. So what does a trout see? So when you cast your fly onto the water, there is a very small window, and I wanted to do this bit first because it does relate directly to how I set my leaders up. And you need to understand what a trout's seeing when you've cast your flies onto the water. Hence this little slide. I should have maybe speed it up a bit. Now, what a lot of people forget is they go fishing. You're not fishing for one or two fish. There's quite literally loads of fish shoaling, and they move round in big groups, so you're fishing over a lot of fish. Now, depth-wise, when a fish is sitting at 6 feet, its window is 5'4" in the disc, and you'll see as the slideshow continues that that's quite a big window. I'm just wondering whether I'll be able to pause this. Yes, I should be able to. That should stay on the screen. Nope, it's not. That's annoying. Bear with me. The tech guy's getting a kicking later. Let's just get... Oh, that's the wrong slide. Oh no, it's all going wrong. Right, here we go. Let's see if I can get this to... Apologies. Bear with me, folks. I just want to add... If I just didn't manage to hit the pause button in time there before it went. Okay, so this is what a trout sees. Now, I'm sure many of you are aware of this already, but what often makes me laugh when I've been out fishing with people, often they've cast their dry flies at a rising fish that they've seen. So if they've seen that fish, what I would suggest is it is no deeper than 2 feet. You know, you might have seen a movement of water and it's moved it with its tail and you think there's a fish there. Now, it might even be higher in the water, and sometimes if you're seeing the fins coming out, they're sitting about 6 inches. So if you look at that disc, they cast at the fish and they say, oh, I'm right on that, but you know, are they really right on it? So if the fish are that high in the water, there's a 6-inch window where you can get that fish's attention. And if you've not hit it bang on the nose, then the fish will just swim by. And it's not because your presentation's been poor, your casting's been poor, it's because the window is absolutely tiny. So the fish that you're fishing for, really, if they're really high in the water, you've got to really be on it with a casting. Obviously, the lower down they are in the water, the bigger window you get to have a look at. Now, I hope that makes sense. And this is important because the way you set your leader up will determine the distance between your flies. So if you're targeting fish at 3 feet and you want to have your flies 4 foot apart, that's not a problem. 4 foot, it's not a problem. When you start to get down to 5 feet and deeper, if you've got your flies only 3 feet apart, then they're seeing both them flies, and that might spook them a little. So that's why I wanted to go through the trout feeding window before I moved on to the leader setup, which I'll do after I've tied my next fly. Right, let's see if I can flip back. Okay, sorry about the technical issues there, folks, and I'm just going to now reduce this. I should really get myself another monitor, but if I plug any more electrics into this this house, I'm liable to blow the circuit board. So let's have a wee look and see if there's any questions on that. You've got elves in your tying room stealing your stuff. Chris, honestly, I haven't got a tying room at the minute. I'm currently working out of the dining room. So this is my home office come tying room. I've actually got a really nice office in work, but I'm not allowed to use it at the moment because they won't let us go into the office. But there you go. Let's have a look. Could you give us a quick chat on... I'm getting a message from YouTube saying I'm not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. As such, viewers will experience bad video, I would think. Well, I hope that's not the case, but we'll have a look at that later. Matt, could you give us a quick chat on the headgear you wear? I'm thinking of buying a lamp and magnifying glass combined, but that looks like a better option. Matthew, I've actually done a video with the headgear for the flies, and when the video is published again, I'll put a little link in the description to the headgear that I'm using for tying, if that's okay. Thanks, Ampsy. Can you collect the fur when it gets blown against the fences? Nigel, I'm sure that would be fine. I think it's the beating them with a baseball bat that's the main problem, you know. Alistair, it'll be alright on the night. Once I've got the live stream downloaded, I'll be able to edit that little bit out and hopefully get the video looking a wee bit sharper. Morning, Chris. Morning, Stevie. What a trout sees. Oh, I've not seen that one, Kerry. Hi, Eddie. Nothing better than a technical issue. Well, at least I didn't stab myself with the scissors. That would be really funny. Thanks, Stevie. It's it's definitely a nice wee hopper. It's one of my favourites. It could do with a bigger hackle, the one I've just tied. I'm not particularly pleased with that, but it'll go back in the jar of never return, and I'll strip the hook later and do it properly. But yeah, let's get on with the next one. So I'll just take that out of the vise, and what I'm going to stick in is, I'm going to show you a couple of versions of this actually. I'm not going to tie a couple of versions, but I'm going to show you a couple of versions. Now, this is a fly called the Big Red, and it's very popular, made popular by the Bristol guys, I suppose. Down on Chew, it works really well, and there's a couple of ways of tying it. This one's got a tail, and the way I like to tie some of mine are without a tail. And if you can just have a look at the profile of that, you can see the footprint's fantastic for fishing. So without further ado, let's crack on. So I'm just going to put another H280 barbless hook in the vise. It's at size 10. Again, it's medium wire and it's a black nickel hook. Now, the reason I'm using these Stillwater and wet fly hooks is because, as I said at the start, this is primarily for stillwater fishing, and if you use dedicated dry fly hooks, you need to scale your kit down. So what do I mean by that? Well, on a reservoir, I'm generally fishing a 7-weight rod, and if I want to transfer from fishing a sinking line to a floating line, I don't want to be changing rods, especially in competition. You just don't want to be doing that. You know, it needs to be slick and quick. So what I do is I tie on these hooks and just make sure I've got enough seals fur and hackle and treatment just to keep it where I want it in the water. I hope that makes some sense. Now, if I was going for a pleasure day's fishing, I would probably take my river dry fly box with me, and I would take a little 5-weight rod, which would be great fun, and you're properly tackled up to address these fish. You know, you take for example a Hanak H130 and try and fish it on a 7-weight rod, you're going to be into a world of hurt. You'll either snap off on the fish, leaving the hook in it, which is never good, or you'll straighten out your hook on maybe that fish of a lifetime, so you don't want to do that. Midas with a parachute hackle, yeah, maybe. Nigel, I will come on to the fishing part. I've got another little slide prepared if I can get it to work, and I'll speak about how I would fish it. When trout break the surface head and tail with no insects on the surface, are they chasing caddis possibly? If they're, Robert, what I would suggest, if they're head and tailing, they're definitely feeding on a hatching insect. They're not chasing anything. Head and tailing generally means they're taking the emerging nymph. Now you have had the Vice for some time, are you going to do a full review? I'm thinking of the F&F or the Norvice, but have yet to make a final decision. Top Cat, I'll try and do a review in the coming weeks. Now, in regards to the Vice, I know that Kevin at F&F is looking at redoing the jaws, and he's going to send the jaws out to everybody. I don't know why, because I'm really pleased with the whole thing so far, but I just want to wait until the final version of the Vice is there, and then I'll probably do a full review. But currently I've never enjoyed tying on a Vice as much as I am with this. I think it's superb. That said, I've never used a Norvice, so I can't really comment on that. It's a bit early in Oregon. Well, thanks very much for your joining. Anthony, I don't use mucilin as a floating usually. I use a bottle of stuff which I haven't got. I've got gink as well, but again, I've got a segment planned for the video towards the end, and I'll talk about treatments and floatants for the various flies and stuff. So I better get on with this fly, or we'll be here all morning. I'll be getting into the rugby at this rate. So, goggles back on. And again, I'm just going to use the nano silt because I've got it out. It's at 12O, and I'm going to catch a little bit of glue onto the hook shank. And trim that up. I'm going to come back slightly. Now, if I was tying a parachute fly, I would have stopped my thread probably 2 or 3 millimeters back up towards the eye. But on this, it's more a comparadun style fly. It's not an out and out comparadun, but it is that style of fly. So first thing I'm going to do is get my post ready. Now what I use, and I've started to use quite a bit, is the ultra dry yarn. It's from Fish On. I really like this stuff. I used to use the Aero Wing, which I really liked as well, but the Aero Wing's really expensive, and this stuff's a little cheaper, and it's every bit as good. So it comes off the thing, it's rather thick. So what I always do is get my bodkin needle, split it up, and depending on the size of fly you're tying, you can either get 3 or you can get 2. Now with my Stillwater flies, I tend to get 2. So I've got that prepared. Now I'm going to lay it onto the hook shank, like so, and I'm going to get a couple of turns in. Now I want it to sit on top of the shank, and that looks okay. I'm going to tie this one with a tail, just because I feel like it. And then I'll come down all the way to the bottom. I suppose it helps with its floatability. And I'll just trim that up. Okay, so that's looking not too bad. Now, next I'm going to come, as I come up, actually I'll catch in my my wire rib, just in case I forget it later, and that happens a lot with me. It's an age thing. And as I get up to my post, I'll just bend my wire rib out of the way, and I'm going to pull my post up, get a couple of turns in front, and build a little hump just to try and stand that up. So that's looking as I want it. Now before I go on to the next part, I'm going to use a little bit of wax on my thread, and I'm going to develop my post. So what do I mean by that is I want it to be able to take the hackle that I'm going to wrap round here. So I'm just going to get a few turns. And the other day, actually, when I was looking for something else, I found a pair of hackle pliers. Not hackle pliers, a gallows tool. And I thought I'd lost it, but yeah, I maybe should have got that out today. But it's just another expense, and you don't need it. And I want to show people that fly tying, it does cost a lot of money, but you know, you can do it for relatively cheap. If you know what you want to tie, then you can do it relatively cheap. Now, before I move on to tying my body, I'm going to try and find a feather that I've got. There it is. That I've picked out from earlier. Something that hasn't blown off the table. I'm really pleased. Okay, so I've already stripped down a little bit of the feather, got the hackle to the size I want. And what I want to do is dress this up to the post. And I'm just getting a couple of turns to hold it into place. And then what I want to do is come up and trap that in. Back down, and then I'm just going to pinch in that little bit of a tag I've got there, and then bring my thread down to the bottom. Now, if I was tying a normal parachute fly or anything else, I would add a little touch of super glue, tiny amount, just there to steady my post. But on this occasion I don't want that, because I'm going to bend this over comparadon style. Morning guys, I'm just having a wee look at the questions. Morning Guy. Morning Ralph, I hope you're all well in Holland. Sorry, the Netherlands. My wife's always picking me up for that. Thanks very much, mate. Is that Aero Wing from Sue Burgess? No, it'll come to me, Kerry, it'll come to me. It's from another company, but I can't quite remember what it is. So, the big red generally is tied with red seals fur, but I have them in black and I have them in claret. So I'm going to use some claret today. It might look not claret on your screens, but it is a very bright claret. Now, as before with the seals fur, I'm just going to add some wax. Now I've got a little pinch in my left hand there, and just in case I need some more, then I'm going to start building up the body of my fly. And then as I get to the post, that's worked out just about perfect for me. So I'm going to grab my rib, the opposite direction to the way the seals fur went. 2 or 3 turns in on the body is all you need, and the last turn is going to come right in beside the post. Then I can grab my thread, catch that in, 2 or 3 turns. Just going to bring my wire out the way and bring my thread to the eye of the hook. Then at my leisure I can spin away the excess wire. So that's looking not too bad so far. Now the big red, as the name suggests, it could be tied on a size 10, 12. I tie mine down to 14s actually, and it seems to work quite well. So what I need is a little bit more wax, and then I'm going to add another little bit of seal's fur. There's a plethora of ways of doing this. This is just how I like to do it. You know, some of the Bristol guys will probably want me crucified because it's not right, but I'll fight them for it. So I'm going to come back up towards the post and then bring my thread around. So, sorry, I want to explain that just a bit clearer. So I've brought my thread up and I'm going to bring it around this side of the post, and that's quite important. Next, I'm going to attempt to bring my hackle around, and again, all I'm doing is gently breaking the stem so that when I turn the hackle, it's going to flow for me. The first couple of turns are always the toughest with any dry fly, actually. And again, I'm just working down that base that I've built, and when I think I've got enough fibres in, I'm going to use my thread. I'm going to keep it close to the back of the body, work it up through the hackles, and I'm trapping in that stem, and I think that should do it. And then what I'm going to do is, it might be difficult for you to see on the main camera here, but I'm putting a little whip finish by hand because my whip finish tool won't fit over the top there, and I've caught that in. Now, just get control of my thread back. I'm going to bring it across the top and to the front of the fly, 2 or 3 turns, and then before I go on, I'm going to come in with my scissors and simply remove my excess hackling. So what I've got is what looks like a normal parachute, but what we're going to do next is pull all them fibres back, or as many as you can get your fingers on, and pull your wing, or your post should I say, down over the front of the eye. Now once you've done that, make sure you've got it into place. I'm going to use a tiny little bit of resin. Then I can simply snip that away, give it a little blast, the UV light, and then once you're happy that's cured, I don't want obviously this big tail, so I'm going to trim that off slightly. Now this is the bit that helps the fly. So what I'm doing now is I'm just using my thumb, and what I tend to do is I take it out the vise when I'm doing this, and I'm flattening out the hackle. Now I can come in with my brush, tease out some of that seal's fur. Then again, I'm going to use a little bit of mucilin this time, thumb and forefinger, and I'm just going to treat the wing. And what this does is sits in the surface film and it's a very, very effective fly in the bigger sizes. And I'll just let you have a look at the footprint. And down to about size 14, for me anyway. It works a treat. So I hope that was of some use to you. I have done a video of the big red, and when I do the when this video comes out later on, I'll stick it up there in the information bar, a link to that video. So I hope that was of some use, guys. Is there any questions? Mexico. What time's it in Mexico, Omar? No questions on the tying of the big red. Can't be any Bristol boys on, or they'd have been like that. That's not right, Lindsay. You've done it wrong. You've done it wrong. Right, okay, I'm going to attempt to run the leader setup now. The trout window slide didn't go so well. I thought I had a grip of it, but didn't quite work. So again, I'm going to drop off the chat for a little second, and hopefully the leader setup piece will go a little bit better. So let's have a look at the various options for leader setup. Okay, so I've got three go-to sort of options: fluorocarbon and monofilament. I think, can I pause it there? There we go. Right, I've just paused it for a second because I want to talk about fluorocarbon and monofilament. Now, I get asked this quite a bit, and it's probably the most argumentative topic for dry fly fishing that you'll come across. Now, I use all three of them. So I use fluorocarbon, I use monofilament, but mostly, and I've not put it on the screen, and I'll show you what I use when we come back, but I use copolymer. And so why do I use copolymer? Well, monofilament's okay, but it's thick. It will lie in the surface film if you treat it properly. Fluorocarbon's excellent, and if I'm fishing in a style where I'm just flicking my flies onto the water, giving it a count of 5, then I'm happy enough to use fluorocarbon. But on some occasions, I just want to throw my dries out there and leave them and wait for the fish to come to them. And on them occasions, I use copolymer. So that's that. So the first example you see on this slideshow, I've got the fly line, a floating fly line, and I've got between 10 and 12 foot of tippet and a single fly. Now, what occurrence would make me use just a single fly? Well, I use a single fly on a flat cam. So if it's flat cam conditions and I see the odd trout coming up to the surface, I will just fish the single fly. I think it's much more effective. There's nothing, 3 fly setup would spook them, and a 2 fly setup might even spook them. So I would go down to probably on a reservoir 6 pound ish and fish a single dry fly. So I'll just get the slideshow started again, I hope. And so my second setup, and my actual one that I would have as a go-to, would be a 2 fly setup. And you can see the measurements on the screen there. And I think for the number of fish that you're fishing for, this is probably, for me, it's my optimal setup and my sort of go-to. And the last one would obviously be 3 flies. And it's easy to handle, and it gives you the best option of covering a few fish. The problem with it, I find, if the fish are tightly shoaled, you can get 2 at once and they just snap you up, which is not a good thing. But that's the I should have speeded this up a bit really. But that's the sort of setup. I'd have 2 big bushy dry flies at either end, and a little Bob's bits in the middle, or sometimes even a very, very small pheasant tail and that works a treat for me. Now let me get the chat back up. And is there any questions on that? Does anyone want to shoot me because I use copolymer instead of fluorocarbon? You need a magnifying glass, Alistair. Well, yeah, I was going to show you, so the Fluoroflex I use is, it's real. It's Fluoroflex. It's not Fluoroflex, it's copolymer, and mostly 6.4 pounds is adequate for any sort of normal still water, I would say. Some of the big reservoirs like Rutland and Grapham, I wouldn't go any less than that for my dry fly fishing. Now, you know, if you've gone out for a pleasure day's fishing and you're just flicking dry flies around and you've taken a purpose dry fly rod such as a 4 or a 5, then, you know, 4 pound fluorocarbon single fly would certainly be adequate for your needs. You know, it depends on the venue and the kind of fish you're going after, but each to their own. People will argue black and white that it makes absolutely no difference what leader you use, whether it be copolymer, monomer, fluorocarbon. Now, as an aside, I'll not mention the angler's name, but he a very competent angler. He was a national champion at one time, and we got in a boat and we were having a bit of a crack, and he said to me, "Lindsay, tippet makes no difference whatsoever. I'm going to tie on some 10 pound Maxima and we'll see how we get on." And once I'd caught 10 fish and he'd had nothing, he seemed to think that, yeah, maybe there is something in the tippet. Exactly the same flies, same lines. It may well have been that I was on the side the fish were on. You can't outdo the luck principle, but there you go. Let's have a look. A few for copolymer. You know, Brian, I haven't fished with Mark Haycock, but I know him well. He's a phenomenal angler, and I don't think he works at Grapham anymore, but he used to fish with ACA Masterline, who were a great team back in the day. But yeah, phenomenal angler. Does copolymer stay in the surface? Yeah, so that's a good question, Run the River, and what I would say is it does sit in the surface, and what I use when I'm using copolymers, I religiously put this stuff on it, and this is Hunt's Original Mud. It's like a leader sinkant, and it really helps to just disguise the line on the surface of the water. I really like this stuff, it's great. Yeah, so copolymer will sit in the surface, so if you're throwing your dry out there and leaving it, then copolymer's ideal for that, you know. Dennis, there is no danger I'd be using a 4 or 5 weight rod in a competition. I would be using a 7 weight rod, and if I was dry fly fishing, and it does happen on occasion, I'd certainly be using the 8.2 copolymer. And I have, talking about that competition fishing, I would have generally my dry fly rigs on a disc like this. They'd be pre-made up, and the flies I've tied so far, there'd be a couple of them on. I'd probably have a 3 fly rig put together, or a 2 fly rig, depending on how I've found it in practice, and I'd have that ready to go, and I would just fish my 7 weight with the heavier tippet. It's a fine balance, you know. Dry fly fishing's great. It doesn't happen often that you get a lot of opportunity to fish dry fly in competition. Don't say, oh yes you do, because very often you do. Well, not very often. Very, very occasionally, in a blue moon, when a pig flies past in a competition, dry fly's the way to go. But more often than not, there's much quicker ways of catching fish. I see it as more a pleasure sort of thing. So I hope that answers your question there, Dennis. £4 Maxima Ultra Green. is about the same diameter as the Rio and way cheaper. That's good to know, Stitch. I'll check that out. Idris, does the poundage of the line affect the turnover, and what guidance can you give refting poundage, length of leader? Well, turnover, that's a good point. Now, dry fly fishing, you should really, and I've seen guys, you know, I've been in boats with competition anglers that have said, right, I'm going to dry fly, and they immediately tie on their 3 flies. In fact, some of them don't even change their leader. They'll just take off their whatever they were fishing with, tie on 3 dries, and they'll launch the dries to the horizon and say, right, I'm dry fly fishing now. That's mental, if you want my honest opinion. You've got to be fishing your dries where you can see them for a kick-off. Very often fish will come up and sit them down, and if you've got your line 30 feet, 40 feet away, and you've not got your eyes on your flies, you're missing the takes. What I tend to do is I've not got much more than 10 foot of fly line out the end of my rod tip, and I'll flick them. They'll be on the water for 4 or 5 seconds. If I get no joy, I'll bring them up in a snake roll cast, and then I'll flick them again to a different area. Count to 5, and very often the takes will come 1 or 2 seconds after the flies have hit the water. You see, if you remember back to the slide when I got it working, and we had the trout viewing window, if you've landed your flies correctly and you just happen to be over a fish, they're going to come and take it really quickly. So I don't much bother about turnover. If you're not turning over a team of 3 flies with 10 foot of tippet or 12 foot of tippet, that you need to be going getting casting lessons, is what I would suggest. 7 weights for all my fishing. Yeah, I tend to. I have got a 5 weight because when I get the opportunity, and certainly when I go to small still waters, I'd much rather use the 5 weight for dries. But the big reservoirs and competition fishing, yeah, I don't much muck about. You know, if I catch a fish on the dry, I want to make sure I can get it in quickly and get on with catching more. Yeah, Top Cat, I'm not disputing that, it can work, but if you've been in the boat with a top class dry fly fisherman like John Horsley, for example, it's a different world. I had my eyes opened a few times. Phil Thomas, it makes a difference. But you've got to take your opportunities as quickly as possible in comp. And I get the fact you get rid of your flies and just tie on what the necessary. Yep, Dennis, totally agree. Yep, you've got to be in competitions, and certainly international level competitions, you've got to be prepared. And I'd be very surprised if, you know, team captains and managers haven't got their team squared away with the old pre-made rigs ready to go. Okay, let's do one more fly, and I'll just stick it in the vise. It's very small, I hope you can see it okay, and it's one of the very first dry flies I ever caught a fish on. It's called a Bob's Bits, and I think I caught my first fish on a dry fly at a fishery called Whittledean, which is in Northumberland. I used to be posted to the barracks there, and it was called Albemarle Barracks. And it did take me the 4 years I was there to learn how to pronounce Albemarle. But down there was a fishery called Whittledean, and it was a fly fishery, and I caught my first fish ever with this fly. So let's get a hook in the vise. And I can barely see the vise because I've not put my goggles on. Where are they? Okay. It's a bugger getting old, I tell you. Right. Let's see if that's there. Okay, it looks very small because it is very small. So what's in the vise is a Hanak H270 barbless hook. It's at size 14 and it's a medium wire on a black nickel. Now, I would even tie these to 16. very tiny flies can be extremely effective. So first thing I'm going to do, again, it's a very quick fly this, it won't take long to tie at all, is a little bit of super glue onto the shank. And then I'm going to come up maybe 2mm before the eye. And what do I need next? Some more of the ultra dry yarn. Now that looks a wee bit too much, so I'm just going to thin out a few bits of that. That's a bit better. And I'll catch that on. Now once I've got that in position, I want a nice little taper going on, so I'm going to come in at an angle with my scissors and just taper that away. And that helps create the taper there. Okay. Next I'm going to get my wire rib. Again, I'm still using the Vineyards 27, just what I've got out. I'm going to catch that on. I'm going to use some of the claret seals fur again. I do love these flies because they're so easy to tie, and they're just very effective, and that's my favourite, to be honest. I do enjoy fly tying, but I like to tie flies that are going to catch fish, and the quicker they can be tied, the better I like it, to be perfectly honest. As Dennis has alluded to, with competition fishing, you kind of get to a mindset when you're away, you know, as many flies as I've got in my boxes, you'll find something that's just super effective, and you've got to end up tying them in the evenings, and that's my least favourite way of tying flies. So I'll bring that up. I'm not going to take away that dubbing at the moment. Then in the opposite direction, I'll bring up my wire rib. Nice and tight. I'll bring that over a couple of turns. Then keeping tension on my thread, I'm going to get a hold of my wire, turn that away. Now I'm going to lift my tiny post, and with what's dubbins left, just cock that up. Then I can come and go with my finish tool, and just tighten everything up. And then with this, oops, I'm just going to trim that ever so slightly, and then I can come in with my dubbing brush, give that a really good scruff out. And I know it looks like not much, but super effective, super effective. Again, I'm just going to use muslin because I can't find the stuff I normally use. Sorry about that. And there you go. Very, very simple. So that's the last fly. Now, I've got one or two other things to say before I go. Let's just catch up with the chat. I'm a very slow reader, I'm sorry. That's an age thing as well, although I was never very quick. Stitch, if you're pleasure fishing, you can switch between rods. You've got all day to enjoy yourself. It's just with the competition fishing, you've really got to utilise the time that you're allocated to try and catch fish. So you've got to stick with one rod really, or have one ready to go very quickly. Idris, I'm sure, you know, practice is the thing. With casting, I need to get myself on the grass actually. It's been that long since I've fished. I'll take my rods down on the grass. You get some strange looks for the dog walkers, but you know, at least when you get to the water, you're going to make the most of your day. Chris, on a normal day out, would I use a 5-weight lock style if I was pleasure fishing, Chris? Yeah, absolutely. It's great fun. That's no bother, Dennis. It's not like I'm really busy at the minute. Yeah, if you don't fish comps, then a light rod is great fun. It's especially if you catch a hold of one of these Rutland fish or Grapham, you know, Pittsford even, you know, 2.5, 3 pound fish. You'll know all about it on a 5-weight. The copolymer. I used this stuff deck. It's Hunt's original mud. It's superb. Now that's taken me on to the other things I wanted to talk about. So just a couple of little tips really. So here's my reel, and on it I've got my floating line. Now if I know I'm going to be doing a bit of dry fly fishing, it takes minutes to grab your muslin, and this muslin comes in the little pot, as you see, that I've just dropped on me, and it comes with a pad, and it's coated with a muslin, and all I do is simply the end of my line, just make sure that's got plenty of muslin on, and that just keeps the tip floating high. Now as I said earlier, generally I like to fish my dry flies quite close to me, so no more than 10 foot of line out the front of my rod ring. Now I say that if you're using such a short cast, then your floating line tip, you'll be able to see if it's sinking in the water, and when it starts to sink you just treat it again and there's no problem. Now although I say I've got 10 foot of fly line out the front tip of my rod, what I also do is I have maybe 20 or 30 feet of fly line at my feet, and the reason for that is if I see a fish at distance and I want to try and cover it, I'm just able to then cast normally and try and cover the fish. And I'm fishing a 3-fly cast. I'm shy at casting, but I'm fairly confident the fish might see one of the flies and take it. And if you can see it heading and tailing, they tend to track upwind. You can sort of get the flies in front of the fish, and if they are feeding on them subsurface, very often they'll just take it straight off the top, no bother at all. So that's your fly line. That's a tip that you can use. The other thing is the treatment of the fly. So once you've actually caught a fish on your fly, the fish slime and stuff can make it much, it's not good, you know. It does start to sink, and sometimes that's great actually, because when it just sinks that subsurface, the fish can sometimes take it much more confidently. But if you want the fly fishing high in the water, then once you've caught a few fish, this slime and grime stuff's pretty good. So it's got a little lid. I'll give you a wee practical demonstration. So you open your lid up, you don't even have to take your tippet off, throw your fly in, give it a wee shake up, and then the fly disappears. But obviously I'd have a bit of tippet and I'd pull the fly out. I must remember that's in there. And the other way, of course, is with a hopper. We'll say the hopper, when that gets slimed up, or it gets you know, you fish with it for a while and you want to carry on fishing with it, this stuff's excellent. Now the label's not very good. This is Hunt's original dust, and it's like you might have heard of Frog's Fanny and stuff, and various other things. It comes on a brush, and you know, you dab it on, it dries your fly out almost instantaneously. Give it a blow, and then it's good to go again for fishing. I hope that makes some sense. Now that there's other products, by no way I'm affiliated. I'm not. I like Tom Hunt, but I'm not affiliated with him. He's not paid me. I just really like the stuff, or I wouldn't say I did. Is there any questions, guys, before I wrap it up? You're welcome, Chris. Anytime. And Dennis, I do use muslin on my flies, but mostly I treat them with a little pot of liquid muslin that I've got, and I stick that into the flies, set them to the side, and then put them into my fly box, and that tends to do quite well. And then once I'm out fishing, the muslin's okay, but generally I use the powder. I prefer it. It's just quicker. Use a small buzzer on a dropper to sink the leader quickly. Well, it's funny you should mention that, Kevin. So sometimes I'll fish, maybe not a buzzer, that's a wee bit heavy, but I'll fish the 2 hoppers, and then in the middle I'll put something like a pheasant tail, and that tends to sink the leader just as quickly. And if you're fishing a small enough pheasant tail, 16, 14, that's ideal. That takes your leader down, no bother. Stitch, frog's fanny. It is a real thing, honestly. I'm not I'm not making that up. Graham, you're very welcome, mate. Right, gents, if there's no more questions, I'll call it a day there. You're very welcome, Nigel. Take care, folks, and I hope you all enjoy the rugby, and whoever you're rooting for wins the day. Catch you later, guys.